various times you may well have heard me or other people talking about servant leadership. This idea where the leader recognizes that actually they are not the top of the hierarchy and everybody is reporting and answering to them, but actually they are the servant of all. Their job is to empower and to direct everybody else. But it comes from a sense of serving the other staff rather than that they serve us. But I'd like to share another model with you, one that's called stewardship or steward leadership. A little bit of history to stewardship. In the Greco-Roman times, so going back a few thousand years, as empires grew, people became rich enough that they started getting slaves. They could then use those slaves to work their land, which then made them richer still. And sometimes you would need a slave to you had different slaves to do different jobs, but sometimes you had then too many slaves and you couldn't manage all of them, so you would elevate one slave to be in charge of some other slaves, and this person was called a steward. That was their title. The expectations of those stewards changed over the years. They were still a slave, but they were a slave who had particular responsibilities. So some slaves would have the responsibility of digging in the fields or bringing the water in or chopping the wood, but some slaves had the responsibility of overseeing other slaves. And this role, it evolved little by little over hundreds of years. It started out very much as a sort of an accounting kind of role that the point of the steward was to make sure that the master's property was just, kept safe. So a sense of sort of accounting. As time went on, that role grew, and there was also a sense of sustainability, that the steward was there not just to maintain the resources, the master's property, but had to also maintain them, make sure that as things wore out, they were repaired or fixed or replaced. Little by little, the steward role grew further, and it became one of actually looking for growth, that the steward would entrust resources to them and would expect there to be a return on this investment, as it were. And finally, about 2,000 years ago, this role of a steward had evolved to the point of being looking at optimization. So a master would entrust a whole range of resources to a steward or to stewards, and would expect the steward to use those resources in the best way possible within the vision of the master. So the master had a particular thing that he wanted to see, a particular vision, a particular objective, and the steward was expected to understand those objectives and to use the resources in whatever way is necessary in order to get to that objective. Now this role of a steward, therefore, can be defined in modern terms as well as being a steward is somebody who has been selected and delegated to manage the property of somebody else, developing those assets in line with the owner's objectives. So they are still answerable to the owner. They do not own the assets themselves. They are simply managing the assets on behalf of somebody else. Now this line of thinking is exactly where we still are at in terms of NGOs. And in many jobs, actually, we recognize that, the person who, let's say the receptionist in an organization, he or she does not own the telephone or the computer or the desk that they are sitting at. they are managing those things on behalf of somebody else, the real owner. In a company, the owner is ultimately shareholders. In an NGO, the owner is ultimately the board, who are representatives of beneficiaries. We are managing certain resources, whether that's time, money, things, on behalf of somebody else in order to achieve their objectives. This is actually a very useful model within the NGO world. I hope that it will remind us that we have to manage things which are not ours. We have to look after them, whether it's time, money, computer, relationships, networks, connections, and so on. But they're not ours. But we have to manage them on their behalf. We have to fight the urge to increase, to get more resources, to become more powerful, because actually these things are not ours. We should actually seek to empower others. I think it's important that we think about, well, whose applause matters. Sometimes we think that we're working, often we have our own agenda of who we're trying to please. And I think it is important actually to take time to think, well, whose opinion really matters to you? Who is it that you are trying to please? And I hope that this model of stewardship is actually quite a liberating one, in that we realize that who is actually calling the shots, who actually is setting the direction. It's not all down to us. It's not supposed to be super stressful for us, because actually we need to be following the lead of the owner, who actually we are going to be accountable to and we will answer to. But it is the owner who is ultimately accountable for seeing the objectives fulfilled.